Mike, we can't hear you.
Oh, there we go. I'm talking to nobody. All right, welcome everybody. Joseph, Aaron, what's going on?
What's happening?
Excited to be here.
Worst intro ever. Put yourself on mute. All right, so people are going to start rolling in here, and I can remove this guy out of the way.
It's going to be a fun conversation.
Yes, it will. So let's get rolling. I know, dealing with time zones and things like that. It's lunchtime for some people. It's after lunchtime for others. People get pulled into things. If you're here live, let us know. Pop your name in the chat. Let us know you're here. If you got questions, also let us know. Pop that in the chat. And as usual, we're going to do Q&A toward the end here. If you want to join us live, we'll let you do that. We can talk face-to-face, if you will. We're going to kick things off with a more, we'll call it high-level philosophical discussion, if you will, because mindsets are absolutely critical when we're looking at this. And we are then going to dive into more practical examples and takeaways for you all. So definitely stick around for that. Obviously, if you don't, this is being recorded. You'll be able to catch it live in a little bit, or the recording or whatnot. So if you are here, you are likely in the professional services space, right? And that runs the gamut from accounting firms, recruiting firms, consulting groups, engineering firms, etc., and more from there. So the main thing that's important to recognize is that your business is different than lots of other businesses. It's very different from SaaS specifically. And the reason I bring that up is because if you spend any time on LinkedIn, you are likely inundated with SaaS people talking about SaaS playbooks and all this kind of stuff. And there's nothing wrong with that. Problem is that a lot of it likely doesn't apply to you. So if you think about your business, you potentially don't have a sales team. Or if you do, it's a very small sales team. And if you don't have a sales team and you're in a consulting organization, we see this all the time with some of our clients, is you not only are you doing some sales, but you're also responsible for managing client accounts and doing billable work. So that means that every hour you spent on sales has an opportunity cost, because that hour could be billable. Okay, that has all sorts of implications from a time for money, billable hours, business model perspective, all that kind of stuff, which we're not going to get into. You all know your business, you know what I'm talking about. Going a little bit broader from there, there's only so many conferences you can go to, so many conversations you can have. So you have to be able to prioritize, right? It's not like you have a 20-person BDR team that's qualifying and a bunch of AEs that are, kind of going from there. If you do have a sales team, maybe it's 3 to 5 people, maybe 10. Like, it's very rare it's larger than that for even large consulting groups. So your time is precious, if you will. And let's not forget, you're also likely responsible for managing existing client accounts for expansion and renewals and all this kind of stuff, right? So going after net new is only one part of what you're going to be doing. So that's one difference. Let's think about your overarching business, right? If you are selling a product, whether it be a physical or a software product, one of the main things you do is build a relationship to the brand with your customers. Problem is, when you're selling a service, that's a small part of it. You have to build a relationship and trust with the people, because your business, your product is your people and their expertise. Okay? So again, think of, are you selling a CRM or are you selling engineering services, right? If you're selling a CRM, the expertise of every individual in that team probably doesn't matter as much, versus if you're selling engineering services, people want to know, do these engineers know what the hell they're doing? Can we trust them? Right? That trust factor on a personal level is a big differentiator. Your target audience might be in stealth mode. So an example I like to give is we work with a client in the biotech space, and one of their audience subgroups is stealth mode biotech startups. You can't find a list. You can't target them on LinkedIn. So you have to find different ways to get in front of them. So your traditional process of targeting and things like that, and ads and things like that you see from SaaS companies won't work. Measurement. This one's important. Aaron, I know you were just in another event, and I'll let you add something here in a second maybe. But measurement very often is much more difficult. It's much less clear cut, right? You see on the SaaS side a lot of conversations around self-reported attribution and all this kind of stuff. Great, do that, and we advocate for it. However, think about if you're in a business that's dealing with channel partners. Okay, either you are the channel partner or you're dealing with channel partners, and sometimes there's even multiple steps. Like you might be like 3 steps removed from the actual end use product in, say, like construction, for example. We see like construction, manufacturing, and things like that, and services that go along with it. It happens a lot. So what do you do there? You're going to lose visibility. So the typical measurement frameworks don't apply, or not as much, not completely. Aaron, I don't know if you want to add a little soundbite to that.
Yeah, my soundbite was at an event this morning. It was a SaaS-led event. They were talking about measurement, and all I said in my mind was, great, this does not work for me and the clients that I serve. And I think that's part of this mindset and conversation is when you shift from kind of that lead gen based motion from SaaS, well, what do you do when you need to build relationships at scale for professional services? So that was kind of what I was talking to Mike and Joseph about.
We'll dive into the measurement stuff in a bit here in more detail. One last difference that's important to mention is you might be dealing with a very complex contracting process. If you are specifically, if you're selling to government agencies, if you're selling to healthcare, especially hospitals and things like that, there's no amount of demand gen that's going to get procurement to give a crap, right? And not just procurement. There's, if you're selling to hospitals, there are like value analysis committees and all this other kind of red tape you got to go through and approve vendors and all this stuff. Okay, so it's not as simple as, again, if you're selling software, especially if you're selling software not to the enterprise, like SMBs and mid-sized companies, things like that. So, again, I mentioned one of the core reasons we want to do this is LinkedIn and a lot of other social channels are just chock full of SaaS marketers talking about, lead gen versus demand gen and other such topics. And there's nothing wrong with that. The problem is it doesn't apply, at least not completely, and you can't just take those playbooks and copy them for your business if you're in the service space. It will not work. And what we're going to show you here today, hopefully, is that there's another way. There's a better option. I feel like I'm a trial lawyer. The prosecution is going to prove that. Promise we won't make it that kind of thing. But if you think about service-based business, if you're listening to this, you're watching this, I can pretty much guarantee that either up until now or until a certain point, your business was built on relationships with founders, relationships with individual people, the SMEs, maybe your sales team once you got a couple. And yet when I talk to a lot of service-based professional services companies initially, oftentimes their questions are around more traditional lead gen type tactics. Or on the flip side, more recently I'm getting questions around more demand gen type tactics. And oftentimes they're forgetting what got them there. And I know there's this whole thing of, what got you there what got you here will get you there. There's definitely some of that. And I think that, but your core mindset of being relationship focused, if you're in the services space, can't change. That has to be there. And that has to be the main thing that you maximize and leverage as you look to scale further past where you are right now. So if we think about that, and relationships are important, what we're really talking about is how do you build those relationships? Well, you build them through conversations. So the premise that we're going to present to you here, once I stop yakking at you, is conversation generation, right? It might sound like, oh, isn't that just the same thing as lead gen? No, it's not. The goal is how can we drive conversations at scale? How can we get as many conversations as possible with the right people? So, with that, Aaron, Joseph, we should talk about the mindsets, because the mindset is absolutely critical to this relationship-focused mindset.
You want to start us, Joseph, and I'll kind of chime in.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think just to build on what you're saying, I mean, we call this the Goldilocks playbook for B2B consulting companies. And the reason we're saying that is most of the marketing talk you're going to hear is going to be either lead generation or demand generation. And again, we're kind of saying, well, those two categories really focus on SaaS companies. And I mean, my title is Director of Demand Generation. So obviously we believe that there's value in creating demand and creating content that's demand gen content that's going to build affinity with the market. But demand gen alone, it ends up being really too slow. So are you going to get really highly qualified people coming into your pipeline? Yes. But for consulting companies, a lot of times, I'd say even most of the time, your differentiation isn't price or time or availability. And if it is, then maybe even lead gen might be better for you in that case, because by the time somebody is ready to raise their hand, they're typically in the buying process already. And if your differentiation is the way that somebody thinks about the problem, and you're going to help them approach it differently than they were already thinking, by the time they raise their hand through demand gen, they may have already made some really important decisions wrong. And now you're coming in after they've already purchased a software package and they're asking you to implement it, or they've already decided to make a major hire in their company that you would have recommended they not make this early. That could really end up making you lose that deal. You're too late at that point. Whereas lead gen on the other side, a lot of times people are already in the buying window and they're not very qualified, and they're really most of the time just shopping on price, and they're trying to get you against the competitors. So that's where
I was going to just jump in really quick. A more concrete example of that is if you look at a lot of like management consulting orgs that do more technical work, but they're solution agnostic. They're the ones that are at very, very high risk of this, because oftentimes what happens is the customer is being educated by the software vendors, and the software vendor, obviously their goal is to get them to see, oh, my solution's best. So instead of going to the consulting group and saying, hey, I want to solve XYZ problem, they go and they figure out, oh, well, I want to use whatever, NetSuite, or I want to, not picking in anyone. I don't know why I think I just heard a commercial on a podcast this morning. That's why it popped into my head. Like I want to use that. So now I need to find a NetSuite implementation consultant, right? And this is where somebody like a management consulting group might lose out, because for a couple of reasons. One is maybe that isn't the best solution and they would have recommended something else, but now they're forced to do this, right? Or they have to try to change their minds. So things like that. I don't want to belabor that point, but we see this, there's a very concrete example there that if you're one of those people, you probably know what I'm talking about. And if you're not, you will at some point.
Software would be a huge one, and then hires. So, sometimes the consultant is going to say, hey, look, you could hold off on that hire because you're only going to need their skill set for 3 months. Now, that's the most important skill that you need. But a good consultant is going to be able to come in and say, this is the type of person you should hire because it's core to your business, or there's this reason that you need this type of role. They're going to be here for the long haul. Whereas this other role, you're really like, maybe it would be, you're going to implement Salesforce, and that, and the consultant agrees, maybe they're a Salesforce consultant. And you're like, well, we already hired a Salesforce administrator. And then the consultant's going to come in and say, well, you're only going to use that person's time like 25%. And the rest of their time is going to be spent doing busy work that somebody else could do that's way less skilled. And so if they've already made that hire, the consultant's too late. And either they're going to say, we're not going to be a good fit, or they're going to already be kind of kneecapped on what recommendations they can make and what they can do. So if you're in a consulting space and you would find that kind of thing that we're talking about to be true, that's where you really want to try to get conversations with your ideal customers, or even just people who are influential in the industry, as early as possible. So you're creating demand generation content that's getting people's attention, that's getting them excited about your unique point of view. But then instead of waiting all the way until they're ready to buy and ready to raise their hand, you want to start to identify, okay, who are these people that are engaging with our content? Or who are other people that we would like to get our content in front of? And how do we start conversations with those people sooner? And the last thing I'll say on that is, it's not just you're trying to have conversations that easily lead to a sales conversation, but that position your sales team or the people who are involved in the sales process as a trusted advisor. So this isn't trying to pitch somebody or say, I need 15 minutes of your time to tell you about how awesome my service is. It's more like, hey, we have this event coming up that I think you'd be interested in. And then that facilitates a deeper conversation. Or, they attend an event that you're doing, and then people on your sales team knowing what to say to follow up, to engage in a more consultative advisory conversation much earlier on in the process.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, it's doing the things that you are likely already good at, but figuring out a way to scale it, right? You're very likely you're good at going to conferences, striking up conversations, and networking, right? You're not pitching with every single conversation. So don't do that in your marketing. Don't do that in what you're in the way that you're gonna try to scale. And oftentimes that's actually what we do see is people forget about what they're good at, and they go, oh, well, I need to do SEO, or I need to do paid search or paid social or this, that, and the other, and they end up doing very transactional type of activities. And one other, I'm gonna let you keep talking because I don't want to waste time. I'm gonna pull up a slide here real quick that illustrate a point here, I think.
Dev, I'm going to jump in to kind of dive deep on something to really explain the difference. Again, why do you focus on leads versus focusing on conversations? SaaS fundamentally has something that professional services doesn't have, which is two types of sales motions: product-led growth, and then the inbound demo request. Professional services doesn't have that, right? So let me explain that a little deeper, right? I can do lead gen to get customers to sign up for a free trial and use our product. And that's how we're going to grow as a business. That's something SaaS does a lot, specifically with lead gen, and is very successful at it. The other option is the inbound demo request. This is where demand gen comes in. I create demand from the market. You come, raise your hand, you demo the product. Professional service just doesn't have that kind of sales motion. So that's why it's important to go for this middle ground, to start conversations and change that mindset, and then you'll start to execute differently. So that was the piece I wanted to add. I'll throw it back to you, Joseph.
Love that, man.
I mean, more very specifically, I know we're still going to wait to get tactical, but if you look at the average professional services site, right? There's kind of your typical fluffy message that you don't like, hey, we're a consulting firm or whatever. It doesn't really say much. And then there's probably a services or solutions section. And there are things you can do, right? So if you look at most or a lot of SaaS sites, you might have a self-serve video demo or an explainer video. You can do that as a professional services company. You likely have a core POV and a core narrative that you that differentiates you, that you want your people to understand, have your CEO or somebody on the leadership team record a video and put that on your homepage. That becomes your demo. Okay, so there are things you can do. I know we were trying to talk about differences, but this is that thing, right? You can't just, it's hard to drive people into a quote unquote demo or a contact us conversation because they don't know you. So help them.
And most of the time for these, especially the companies we work with, their customers have a problem, but they think, I'll say it this way, their customers have pain, but they think it's coming from a different problem than what it actually is. And so they go out and they see advertising, lead gen for software, and they do the demo and they go, oh yeah, this is going to solve my problem. They make that decision. Then when they go to implement it, they go, oh wow, we really need help. Let's get a consultant involved. Then a really good consultant is going to try to diagnose, where is this pain actually coming from? And if the pain is coming from something totally different than what that software solves, now you have a big problem because they've already purchased it or whatever. So that's where getting those conversations is important, because you need to get in and reframe the problem. I mean, basically exactly what we're talking about right here. A lot of professional services companies have pain around not being able to scale their business past a certain point. They think it's coming from, an issue with marketing, and they go, lead gen is the answer to that. And we're sitting here going, no, it's not. Don't build a whole model around lead gen and then come to us after that's not working and go, we need your help to try to make lead gen work. We're not going to be able to help you make your lead gen more effective. We're saying, no, there's a totally different way of viewing this. And that's, don't take the relationships that have always worked, shift off of that to all of a sudden start trying to run off of transactions. You will see some immediate results because there's a certain amount of low-hanging fruit you're going to get, but you're essentially cutting down this beautiful apple tree that you've grown all the way along to this point through relationships, and you're going to only get a little bit of fruit, and then it's going to die off. So instead, it's taking all of that effort you've done and to build up those relationships that your team already has. And then really what we're saying is, how do you maximize the value that your sales team is bringing to the market? How do you get those relationships and those one-on-one conversations they're having now and get them more of those, instead of how do we get them to be able to cold pitch more? How do we get them to make 100 dials a day? It's like that same effort that you would put into hiring an SDR to make 100 calls a day. What if that person could have one or two genuine conversations with people who are in the industry every single day? I guarantee you that over the course of 3 months, you're going to see way more value come from those consistent daily conversations with people who want to learn, they want to grow in the space, they want to find the right solutions to the problems they have. Are they in market right this second? No, but they don't have to be, because these deals usually take a long time.
Well, the other kind of going along with we were talking about, Joseph, is most service-based firms, right? A lot of their business comes from referrals. Okay, sure, a lot of that comes from existing clients. You do good work, you build up a reputation, your clients refer you. Great, that's awesome. We'll get to that from a measurement perspective in a little bit. I think there's worthwhile talking about. But the other thing is, a lot of these referrals come from other people in the industry. They come from, sometimes it's partners, sometimes it's just other people that know you, that are in a similar space but do something different, right? You meet these people at conferences, you strike up a conversation. What do you do? What do you do? They like you, you like them. Now you're referring business back and forth. How often does that happen? And all of a sudden, once growth stagnates, people forget all about that and they go, okay, well, I gotta run ads to, the CTOs or the CISOs because I'm a cybersecurity firm. That's all I'm gonna do. And again, that's that weird mentality, that mindset shift that happens, the bad one, which is you shift from, how do I build genuine relationships and have good conversations that can drive referrals, to how do I get the most decision makers through the door as quickly as possible? And that just doesn't make sense, right? Because what we want to be able to do, right, if we think about conversation, there's the one-to-one conversations. You're going to keep having those, and at the end of the day, that's what you're going to need to make a sale. Like, otherwise it's never going to happen. There's the one to few conversations, whether you're presenting at an event or doing a live or something, or a webinar like this. Great, you got to do some of that too. But your growth levers are not that. You can use some of these like the webinar tactic to drive these, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But your growth levers are, how do you get external conversations about a problem that you solve to happen about you? So how awesome would it be if two people at a conference are talking about a problem they're having? They're like, oh, well, what about XYZ company? They seem to, I heard them talk about this, that, or the other. Seems like an interesting thing. Or how great would it be if two people within one of your target accounts talk about something that they saw you or heard you talk about? Right? Those are, you want to be in conversations that are in a room that you can't actually ever be in. That's the goal. That's your scale lever. And if you're doing the traditional lead gen, you're not going to do that. There's nothing noteworthy in most lead gen activity. Doing a ho-hum ebook download and all this kind of stuff isn't going to do that. And then on the flip side, on the demand gen side, it's great. It might work, but like we talked about, based on your business, you might be missing out on a bunch of opportunities. You might be too late to the conversation because of it. Because you're not driving.
On the lead gen side of things, it'll actually probably drive some of those people away. Like if anything, if people remember it through lead gen and they didn't call you, it's probably a bad thing, and they won't want to talk to you just because you annoyed the crap out of them through your, pushiness. I think one last thing, because we have some stories we could tell that illustrate this point, I think, really well. But one last thing to keep in mind with mindset is, I'll ask you to raise your hand in the chat. So imagine for a second, or just close your eyes for a second and remember the last time you engaged a consulting company or a consultant, or maybe even a software that you've worked on. How did you go about figuring that out? Was it because you downloaded an ebook? Was it because you heard somebody on a podcast? Did you talk to a friend and ask them what they thought about it? Comment in there, but I'm going to go out on a limb here and guess that you didn't download an ebook and then all of a sudden buy a $5, $10, $15, $20,000, make a decision on that amount of money. And a lot of times in the professional service spaces, it could be more like $50,000, $250,000, million, $2 million deals. Nobody's going to download an ebook and buy $1 million worth of consulting. That's just not going to happen. That's not the reality of it. And so it's those relationships that you're building over time that are going to lead to those, bigger purchases. So for example, this is on a smaller scale, but when I was first starting out a business a while ago in marketing, I ran into this guy at a local event. His name's Brian Wallace. If you've been on LinkedIn for a while, you might have run into him. He's the infographic guy. And I heard him talk at this local event about infographics. And he went through some success that they've seen and talked about it. And I was like, man, that's really cool. One day I'd love to be able to afford one of his infographics. That'd be awesome. But then I talked to him afterward, and he ended up getting lunch with me and was just super genuinely wanting to help me in my business and grow my business. He gave me tons of advice. He probably talked to me 3 or 4 separate times. Fast forward to when I was working at my previous job, there was an opportunity for us to do an infographic that really made a lot of sense. And because he built that rapport and relationship, it wasn't even a question of whether we should work with somebody else or not, in my mind. And so then it was just a matter of me bringing him in and referring him and giving him a good recommendation. And he did a great job. And I've recommended him to 4 or 5 different companies now. He's done an awesome work. So if you're looking for infographics, go talk to Brian. But he's always focused on relationships, and he's used social and LinkedIn specifically to meet people, to network with people, and to build rapport. And I've recommended a ton of business to him. I had recommended business before I'd worked with him, and now after, I've continued to recommend him to companies that I'm not working at, because he's really he's added value to me. We built relationship, we built trust, And that's really what you want to do through your marketing. You want people who maybe would never even work with you or be in a position to work with you to be recommending you. And I can think of 3 or 4 other companies that I've recommended people work with when I had never worked with them to that point.
And this actually gets us into a little bit of the measurement discussion, right? So would you rather have, I'll give you 3 scenarios. Would you rather have a client that buys $100,000 worth of services from you once and doesn't refer anybody and doesn't renew after a year or whatever, or after that initial engagement? Would you have a client that buys a $20,000 engagement from you and maybe doesn't renew with you after that because they're going to do things in-house or whatnot, but they keep referring, say, $50,000 worth of business to you every single year after that? And the third one is you don't get a client. What you get is a unofficial referral partner that consistently puts your name out there every single time a problem comes out, and that generates hundreds of thousands of dollars of business for you every single year. I mean, it's a trick question. I think we could all agree which one we would rather have. But where do we mostly focus our time? Right? Because we're not measuring, most businesses don't actually measure referrals very well. CRMs only include customers. Why? Or if they, even if they do only include customers, they don't tag who the referral comes from often and things like that. Right? So from a measurement perspective, in my mind, one of the biggest things you should be measuring, both for clients and referral partners, is how much referral business is it driving? Because that is a sign of a quality relationship. And what you want is the highest percentage of those in your client roster. Now, not every single client is going to be a referral partner. Some people just don't want to do it. Whatever, right? I'm not saying you should be pushy or anything like that. But when it comes to measurement, you should be measuring referral business in a much more granular way, because if you can understand where your referral levers are, that can be probably your biggest growth lever in a service-based business. Yet most service companies completely ignore that.
Yeah, I just want to chime in, and I think we were talking about mindset, starting into skill set. I do want to mention some ways how we are actually doing conversation generation, and we can kind of see where we want to take that. So I think for the referral idea, that's a great mindset. So how do we actually actionize to have conversations? I think the first one I'll walk you through is kind of something we're doing right now, right? Is understanding how social platforms work. Prior to this event, we all reached out to our networks, to people we've had conversations about relationship marketing already. We invited them to this event. We hope to have a conversation with you right now. That's speeding up the process, right? I love Brian's comment about ads. Like, yeah, ads alone don't make us make that decision, but ads plus activation plus creating relationships does. So that's one. Another one I'll kind of speak to, because we talked about it earlier, is if you're an engineering firm, there's no demo for someone to demo, right? You have to have a conversation to start talking about the requirements now. So that's where we actually do use ad distribution. We try to get those, if it's a worksheet, if it's a calculator, if it's something that's valuable to a relationship, we use ad platforms to get that in front of those people. And then we have conversations about how to use the worksheet. So I just want to offer those two, like, this actually conversation generation, what we mean when we're talking about it and what we're actually doing. So I've just
I'm glad you brought that up, getting us out of the philosophical weeds, if you will. I do want to get back to one more measurement thing in a bit, but what you just talked about, Aaron, it's a great, I mean, we did this for an engineering firm. I'm guessing maybe that's why it came to mind, right? It was a
Product
a med device engineering firm. It was a product requirements guide, right? So you might think, well, didn't you didn't you just tell us that ebooks suck? Yes, they do usually.
Well, this wasn't an ebook.
This wasn't an ebook.
The difference is it's something that is actionable. And ebooks are usually more like, here's how you do it, walking through it, versus it was an Excel sheet that people actually use, and they fill it out, and they would use it to be able to understand the problem better. I mean, that's the ideal. And
it was an Excel sheet with some instructions on it, right?
Yeah, so they gave some instructions around it, but it's essentially something that an engineer would actually use to solve this problem. So, it's the best kind of what we like to call a conversation magnet would be something that somebody's going to actually use in their daily job, but it helps to redefine the problem to what the consulting company actually sells, or the engineering company in this case. So, engineers have to define their requirements, but sometimes they do it wrong. And by the time they engage the engineering firm, they've already gone so far down that they've already lost a lot of time or a lot of money. Whereas if they could get in earlier, it's not even something that they make money on. But if the engineers start thinking about it the right way, once they're ready to buy, they're positioned to really be able to help them accelerate growth. So it's looking for something that adds value, that's actionable, and shows the intent to solve the problem that you solve. And if those things are all true, that's somebody that's really worth engaging in a conversation, and not a sales conversation. We're not trying to collect contact information so that you can call on the phone and say, hey, are you ready to buy our engineering services? It's reaching out to that person to say, hey, you downloaded this sheet. I'd love to take a look at it with you and see if there's any areas where we could give you some pointers or something along those lines.
Yeah, and I think one thing to point out there is when you're thinking about kind of this, and we did a whole conversation on it a while back, but kind of the gated versus ungated debate. Again, I think that whole debate, as it exists now with most SaaS companies, doesn't 100% apply to what we're talking about. Now, I'm not saying gate everything, and I'm not saying ungate everything. I think you have to think about, is it helping you understand first-party intent? And is it helping you provide a better experience? So if the gate helps you do those two things, then do it. If it doesn't, then you should probably consider not, right? So, Aaron, you were talking about some more practical conversation generation.
Right. I mentioned those mainly because as we talk about measurement, so we kind of have a baseline of like, what are we actually measuring when we say conversation generation? Because then I think some other things for measurement, if you're going to cover, Mike, is like the qualitativeness of it all. Or again, you're talking about referrals. I think that's great. Really changing the mindset of maybe those revenue metrics you're looking at.
Yeah, and what I was going to go to is like something initially like not to do, right? So if you think about marketing automation software, things like that, and you think about okay, if we're going to do ebooks or even the guides like we were just talking about, things like that, lead scoring and all this kind of stuff. Like it just, even with the example that we just gave, it's very unlikely that someone's going to buy a multi-million-dollar product development engagement just because they downloaded your product development's guide. There's got to be other things associated with it, right, that don't happen on your website usually. So your lead scoring system, just don't do it for the most part. It's just not gonna drive the right decisions.
I think a couple other things to talk about that are ways that you can get involved with conversations, just practical, because it's a combination of multiple things. And I think this is where, when we go into an engagement, it's usually, okay, we need to start with one area where there's lowest hanging fruit or the most need, one of the two. And then we're going to build layers on top of each other. So, I mean, typically in engagement, we're not going to start with all of the different things at the same time. But in an ideal world, once we've been working with the client for a while, they're going to have the demand gen side going. So we're going to have like a podcast or a show or something like that that's helping to get their point of view out there. And we're going to start looking at who's engaging with that. And is it possible for somebody on the sales team to reach out and be positioned as a trusted advisor? So that's one piece that you could start looking at. Piece number two is doing something like a webinar where you offer some kind, where you're talking through an issue and then you're offering some kind of a download which is that conversation magnet we were just talking about. So something that's very actionable, a worksheet, something like that. But it's also really important for especially consultants that also sell to start being seen out in the world as trusted advisors. And that's where working with your team to build their personal brands on, LinkedIn would be a typical channel that we see the best results from. And getting those people involved in the ad creation. So instead of using just like a stock photo in your ads, like use the people who are actually going to be engaging with customers, whether that's people on the sales team or people that are actually going to be delivering the work. Use their pictures. And then when people engage with those ads, make sure that the sales team is able to see that and reach out to those people. And again, not to pitch them, but just to start a conversation and open that door and start having those conversations. So anyway, we could talk through some tactics of how we're starting to experiment activating the team on something like LinkedIn, because that's always the biggest challenge. But those are a couple of the practical things that we're starting to do.
Yeah, well, and let's do that. One of I was going to add to what you're saying, Joseph, is think about how much more valuable it is to be able to go to a conference, let's just say, because again, professional services conferences still have a big part to play, right? Especially in like technical fields like engineering and biotech and heck, even construction and things like that. Like we're talking commercial construction here. If you can go and your face has been all over the place, right? And people have, let's assume they remember nothing else. They don't remember the message. They don't really remember, at least not overtly. They don't remember anything other than the fact of your face. I mean, how many times have you been in a place like, I know that person, right? You're much more likely to strike up a conversation, or if that person strikes up a conversation with you, you're much more likely to be receptive to it. Because it's a psychological thing. And I think also when we're talking about skill sets, really understanding human psychology and the psychology of relationships is going to be a superpower for you if you can focus on that. Because while you can't predict what path someone's going to take to come to you and buy $1.5 million consulting engagement, what you can predict is how they're going to behave throughout the relationship building process.
Yeah, major familiarity bias for sure.
Yep.
Builds trust, builds rapport. Absolutely.
Yeah,
Let's talk some tactical stuff. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Aaron.
I'm going to do tactics, so I'm going to relay
Awesome.
kind of what you just said.
Aaron's our tactics guy.
So I love the idea of, again, professional services. You're going to go to a trade show. You're going to go to a conference. You're going to talk to someone. This is essentially tactically what we're trying to do in the digital space to scale that word of mouth. So Joseph mentioned the podcast, our live event, running that. I think that's a great conversation space. And we can utilize that within our marketing strategy and execution to get people there. So instead of going to a conference, I have coffee with someone, it's a great conversation, and I invite them to another conversation. I'm going to do that on LinkedIn ads, right? I'm going to get the right message in front of them, see how they're engaging with it. I've mentioned this before in other live shows, is I'm literally collecting individuals in a spreadsheet. So then sales can go activate them and say, hey, let's get some coffee, or hey, come on the podcast. Let me outreach them. I think tactically, that's what we mean by conversation generation, which is way different than measuring lead gen and numbers and lowest cost per lead. It's a little different than measuring demand gen and multi-touch attribution, right? Is I'm just trying to figure out who those people are and then start to make activity, make sure we're having conversations. So we can start with that one.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, it's, the really good salespeople have this uncanny ability to know when to switch to sales mode, when to make the pitch. And it's no different when you think about it in the digital space. It's how can you create these opportunities for conversation, and if you're paying attention and you're looking at the right signals, you know when to reach out with what. So,
two things here really quick that I wanted to, first of all, if anybody wants to jump in and you have a question or you disagree or you agree and you want to join in, I'm going to put a link in the chat and join us live as a guest and join the conversation. Love to have you guys jump in. Well, let me make sure that went. Yeah, looks like we got that out. And yeah, I'll just start with that because I want to make sure that I got that link out on LinkedIn. Looks like it didn't, so let me make sure it gets there.
Perfect. Another tactic I'll mention is we like video as an agency. We're doing it right now. I think why wait to meet someone in person? It's like we can get that, Pablo, I see your comment here about personal brand. I can get someone familiar with me right now. I can use that video in distributing ads. I can use that video in outreach. I can use that video in so many places, again, to start the conversation and not make it a sales pitch, right? But I think that's another great tactic that you can use throughout so many marketing channels.
Yeah, I mean, I was looking at Pablo's comment. Let's pull this up quick. Is that familiarity aspect is so important, and people forget about that. And this gets into the concept of affinity versus awareness. Like, you can buy awareness, you cannot buy affinity. So your goal, step one, should be to build affinity. I'm gonna pull up a slide actually, because I think we have a good visualization for sort of the what we call, at least maybe I'm starting to call this the relationship enablement flywheel. So let me pull this up quick. Here we go. So again, kind of we're talking about personal brands. The way to think about it is your personal brand can drive some of the relationship nurturing, right? Because it allows people to reach out to you, it makes it easier for you to reach out to them. You can, content that gets pulled out of there can then be repurposed into ads and things like that. But then, events like this, recording conversations at a live event, like an in-person event. You see more and more people doing that, like they'll record their podcast at their booth or something, or at a separate, at a venue close by to the event, things like that, right? That can drive also some of your personal brand content. So it all fits together in a nice flywheel, if you will. So, since we're talking personal brands, I mean, I talk to CMOs and marketing leaders pretty often, on a daily basis, pretty much. Both our existing clients and other people reaching out, things like that. And one of the core things I usually get pushback on is, we can't do that. Our CEO is not gonna engage on social. It's either they don't see the value, they don't have the time, they don't legal compliance, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, look, I get it. I've personally worked with some of the most regulated businesses out there, and defense, for example, and med device and financial services. Okay, some of the most regulated out there. The good ones are able to find ways to do this. They're able to get not around the regulatory, it's not a loophole, but they're able to work with it and still do it. So compliance and regulatory isn't really as big of a roadblock as you think. If the response is, well, they don't have the time, what it really means is they don't see the value. Or it could mean they don't know where to start. They think it's going to take a long time. So let's talk about some ways that we can help folks get around that.
I think the number one thing is just somebody in the company taking action and starting to build a personal brand, and bringing more education to the space, building trust and rapport in the market. I mean, that is going to go further than anything else. And I mean, just another note on the topic of personal brands that I think is really important. Oh, looks like we got Pablo, so I'll make this quick and we can pull Pablo on the stage. But say that you have a limited budget and you can't afford to bring in an agency like Proofpoint, but you want to do something. Getting your team to build their personal brands, if you can really get it going, is one of the most cost-effective and most effective things that you can do. I mean, I would say that it's the most challenging thing for us to get our clients to do is to activate their teams on social. But it's one of the things where I'm like, guys, this is really the fuel that's going to be building conversations is personal brands.
Tactically, I mean, one of the things that we're doing right now is we're using a tool called Story Prompt. There's a free shout out for them. They're not paying us. This is not a sponsorship. But it's a very easy way to do video prompts and get other people to record a 3 to 5 minute video answer. Right? So if you as the marketing team know what questions are being asked typically, right? All you gotta do is talk to your account executives, talk to your salespeople, or again, in your environment, there might not even be official salespeople or full-time salespeople. Understand the questions, send some prompts over. Now you're able to provide these people with video content. You want to take it a step further? Go straight for them. Heck, you've got all sorts of tools. Use AI to summarize it, do some editing on top of it, give them a couple of posts to post. Right? Make it easy for them and make it work within their daily workflow. All right, Pablo, I'm going to pull you on here. What's up,
guys?
How's it going, Pablo? Thanks for joining.
Happy to be here. Saw you looking for people. I figured I'd raise my hand and come chat. I love sharing the stage with you guys. So happy to be a part of it, man.
You're always a good sport. Thanks for joining.
Yeah, for sure. Listen, the thing that really right now you were just talking about reducing friction to creating content for people, which I couldn't agree with more. Right, like just what I find that people will get in their heads about all these different obstacles that they have to jump through in order to make it good enough, right? And it all comes from this place of like, I'm going to put something out there and I'm going to be known for this thing, and I can never change from the thing I said. But what they don't realize is that the more they have built in the at-bats, right? Like if you guys were to put out one of these shows once a year, only one time at a conference, and that keynote really matters. But the fact that you show up so regularly allows you to course correct if you need to, right? Like if you treat it more as a press conference than as a press release, then it builds in that idea to be able to course correct, which I think is really important for people to realize, because if not, they have this feeling of permanence. They're attributing permanence to something that doesn't need to be so permanent, when what we just talked about is this idea of familiarity, right? Just the fact that I've seen y'all's faces all over LinkedIn makes me think that you're a huge deal, and you are in my eyes, right? But like, whether I don't know exactly what you're talking about all the time, I just know that you're there. And generally when I tune in, I get value. And that's a huge, huge like asset to someone next time we see each other in person,
Yeah, for sure. And this conversation is making me think about something I've been thinking a lot about already, which is building in public, right? I think if you look at the environment right now, so if you're marketing, obviously all the AI stuff going on, and if you look at who's winning, OpenAI is winning. Why are they winning? A big part of it is because they've built the entire damn thing in public, and they've been doing it for years. Versus everybody's in stealth mode. All the big companies have been in stealth mode. Okay, so especially as a consulting organization where, again, your people are the product, this allows you to, in one way, shape, or form, build in public. You can build your opinions in public. You can build your services in public. You can build your expertise in public, right? And if you do that, it creates, probably like you were talking about, creates that familiarity. It creates that affinity that we were talking about earlier. I think that's a really important thing for people to realize. And you can do that across a variety of channels. Like people get stuck, they get too channel focused. Like, oh, well, SEO. Okay, well, what about it? You can answer content like this can drive SEO. You do this, you make sure to answer some questions. Maybe you pull out a couple of clips. You do a summary. You pop your video on top of it. Now you got something that can drive organic traffic. But it's still the core point. You're not doing it just to drive organic traffic. You're doing it because you're trying to create affinity and familiarity. Organic traffic's a byproduct, right? Same thing with ads. Same thing with events. Same thing. I mean, everything.
Yeah, and if somebody, I mean, probably even I've seen your face pop up on LinkedIn here and there. If you were to cold pitch me in a DM, I would be 100 times more likely to respond to you than to the random people who shoot me an email and they're like, I want 15 minutes on my calendar. Even if you just, the most blatant cold pitch in the world, I would still probably at least respond and say, no, I'm not interested at the very least, rather than just completely ignoring you, because I've seen your face. And I would probably be a little bit nicer than that and just be like, oh, it's not the best time, whatever, you know? Or if it was really relevant, I would give you 15 minutes on my calendar way before I'm going to give somebody random I've never seen. And we've never talked before. I don't even think that I've seen your post show up in my feed, but I've seen you show up in the comments here on this show. And just from that, I would give you a totally different benefit of the doubt if you were to reach out to me with a straight pitch. Now, if you reached out to me and you were just like, hey, I'd love to chat for 15 minutes, I would do that. Whereas I get other people who reach out cold and I'm like, this is going to be a pitch. It's going to be annoying. I'm not interested. But just because I've seen you show up without even necessarily adding value to me. Now, there's other people that I do see show up in my feed on a regular basis. And I have gotten value from them, you know, from learning from their content. And if any of those people reach out, even if I'm not interested in the product at all, I'm going to jump on just because I want to talk with them because I've been seeing them show up and they've benefited me in some way. So I love that. I love what you were sharing there.
Yeah, so true, man. And it's funny because if you're paying attention to the LinkedIn influencers, you're starting to see it, right? Because I think we all went into a cocoon and the whole world went totally digital. And now you're seeing people, it's like inbound happens and all of a sudden you see like Nick Bennett with James Carberry somewhere and you're like, oh man, like these people are getting together, right? Like it's the same effect to each other, right? And it's not any different than, I don't know about you guys, right? But I grew up in a Hispanic family, so we went to church every weekend, and it's like the people that I saw at church every Sunday, I didn't know them, right? But if I saw them around town, I would have a familiarity to them. And the same way in my 20s and early 30s, super involved with nonprofits in Miami, I was just at every networking event around town. And if you go to like 5 networking events and you see the same dude at 3, by the 4th one, you feel totally enabled to walk up to him and be like, hey, you know, like what's up, right? Like it, and people really underestimate that quality of like reducing that. Go ahead, Mike.
So there's actually it got me thinking. There's the other side to this coin, which is just as important. It's if people see you having all these connections, they start going, oh, maybe this guy or woman or whoever, this person really knows what they're talking about. So when I think about, you're giving a personal example, when my wife and I first met, I was really, I mean, I'm still big in it, but I was competing in Muay Thai and I was in the local MMA gym, which was pretty big. And there's lots of people there, and pretty much anywhere we'd go, we'd run into somebody. They're like, oh, hey, Mike, how's it going? She's like, do you literally know everybody? I'm like, no, not really. But it creates that thing of like, oh, well, this person's popular. This person knows what they're talking about. Like, there's that part to it too. Now, I'm not saying this is just a popularity contest, but there's an aspect to it that is.
Yeah, and it gets multiplied by kind of what you were saying. If you are seen with other people, the transitive property of mathematics fits in for reputation, right? Like the whole guilty by association thing is very, very real. I'm super happy to show up here and just be in 3 frames with you guys and me, because people are going to be like, well, Bumble must know the proof point marketing guys and they're good dudes, right? So like that by itself elevates my brand to a certain extent because I get to share the stage with you guys, and hopefully I'm saying intelligent things, so it's, you know, reciprocal. But the guilty by association thing is something that record labels have been doing forever.
Mathematics.
Huh?
I said, you did just say transitive something in mathematics. I don't even know what that is. That sounds pretty smart.
Yeah. But like record labels have been doing this forever, man. Like in the 40s, they would, if they wanted to put somebody on the scene, they would. I can't speak accurately to years, but right, like if you wanted a star to get famous in the 60s and you showed a picture of that star sitting next to one of the Beatles, people are going to be like, who's this person, right? And that gives them that shine. I've experienced that myself in sharing stages with people of a much higher ilk than me in real life. Whether I'm a moderator or I'm just a panelist and I just happen to have like gotten there, people automatically assume that you're on that level. And if you do that enough times, it's a compounding effect of credibility and social validation, which is a giant lever of influence.
Yeah, for sure.
Love it.
Probably you want to leave us with any other last minute intelligent things?
Oh man, I love how you guys are constantly evolving your frameworks and the way that you speak, right? Like it's really extraordinary to watch you build in public, right? Like seeing the evolution of the different, how you frame and name and claim things, and then you put these models around it, and then you share it. I think that there's a lot for people to learn on this like showing up with intelligent thoughts, sharing them, getting feedback from people, and being systematic about that. I think is anybody that's watching right now, I'm sure has seen it too, and you can do it also. Like I just think it's really, really smart, and I'm trying to be like you. So thanks for having me on.
Thanks, Pablo.
Thanks, Pablo.
So I pulled up Brian's comment here earlier, and Brian tried to correct it, saying decreases the pressure of getting it perfect. I actually agree with both of them, really. I think people are too concerned with getting it right. At the end of the day, especially if it's more opinion based, like opinions are never completely formed, right? They're meant to evolve as you learn more and as you get more feedback, right? That's the whole concept of building in public that we were just talking about too. So I think any company, any person can do that. And yeah, I think if you're doing it consistently, yes, there's a familiarity component to it, but there's also this, it makes it easier for you to feel like you're able to iterate. So I know we're over time. A couple examples I wanted to just throw out there. I mean, this might sound like it can take a long time, but you can usually start getting positive qualitative feedback very, very quickly. I mean, we launched this for a client in the ag tech space recently. Their very first event that we hosted for them, or that they hosted, I should say, they had 2 of their top 100 accounts attend. Okay, we had another client in the manufacturing space. Their very first event, they actually got somebody to submit an RFQ or a whatever, a request.
Yeah, they signed.
They signed a deal, didn't they? Yeah.
They signed an NDA and an RFQ the day of the event.
Again, this can happen a lot quicker than you think, especially in some of these more niche spaces, because nobody's doing it. Most of your competitors are still, if they're doing anything, they're doing the traditional, let's write some ebooks and then let's collect leads and then let's reach out to these people. They're still playing that game. Play a different game. So I think that's probably a good stopping point, gentlemen, unless you guys have something else to add.
Play a different game. Love it.
Play a different game.
And if anybody wants to chat marketing, hit us up.
Yeah.
We like talking about marketing. We won't pitch you on the first date, I promise. We just like chatting about this stuff. And if you're trying to work through this, even if you're, one-man show, or you've got a big organization, you're trying to figure it out, love to just have a conversation and talk through these things. And we're finding some stuff that's starting to really work and resonate well. And so if you want to play a different game, then just hit one of us up, and we'd love to chat with you through what you're thinking and see if there's any way we can add value to you.
All right, everybody. Thanks for joining. Thanks for watching, listening, and catch y'all in a few weeks.